I'm Maya, 29 years old, and just 6 months ago, my world was crumbling. I was standing in the middle of Innovator's sleek, glass-walled conference room in Seattle, listening to the man who was supposed to be my mentor, my boss, Mr. Harrison, mock me in front of my entire team. His words, laced with a venom I'd come to recognize, cut deeper than any knife. He had just fired me, publicly, humiliatingly, and with a sneer that suggested I was nothing more than a nuisance. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his cruel act wasn't an ending. It was the spark that ignited a fire within me, a fire that would consume his career and expose the rot beneath Innovator's polished facade. Before I delve into the details of how I turned his mockery into his downfall, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a vibrant, close-knit community in Atlanta, always dreaming of making a difference through technology. My parents, both educators, instilled in me the value of hard work, integrity, and speaking truth to power. I poured my heart and soul into my computer science degree, graduating with honors and a burning desire to innovate. Seattle, with its thriving tech scene, felt like the promised land. Innovatech, a giant in AI solutions, was my dream company, a place where I believed my ideas could truly flourish. Getting hired as a senior innovation specialist was a monumental achievement. The campus was futuristic, the benefits generous, and the energy palpable. I was assigned to a cutting-edge project, and for the first few weeks, I felt like I was living my dream. The team was diverse, and the work was challenging and exciting. Then I met Mr. Harrison, my direct manager. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, with a reputation for being a tough but brilliant leader. At first, he seemed professional, if a little aloof. He'd nod during meetings, offer terse feedback, and generally maintain a distance. But soon, subtle shifts began. During team lunches, he'd ask me about my background, not out of genuine interest, but with a probing, almost skeptical tone. "So you came from a state school, right?" he'd inquire, his eyes lingering for a beat too long, as if waiting for me to confirm some perceived inferiority. He'd often interrupt me in meetings, not overtly, but by subtly shifting the conversation away from my points, or by rephrasing my ideas as his own. Once, I presented a complex algorithm I developed, and he interjected, "That's a very unique approach, Maya. Are you sure it's scalable for our global clients?" The emphasis on unique and global felt like a thinly veiled jab at my perceived lack of mainstream experience or understanding. It was never direct racism, but a constant, low hum of doubt and dismissal. It was like being constantly told, without words, that I didn't quite belong. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to his management style, or perhaps my own sensitivity. "He's just old school," I told myself. "He's probably tough on everyone." But the way his eyes would glaze over when I spoke, or the slight smirk he'd suppress when I offered a suggestion, told a different story. One afternoon, during a brainstorming session, I proposed an innovative solution for a client's data security. It was a complex idea, but well-researched. Mr. Harrison listened, then chuckled softly. "Maya, that's quite ambitious for someone with your perspective." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, the subtle intonation that implied my perspective was somehow limited or less valid. It was the first time I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, a premonition that this wasn't just about work performance. This was about something much deeper, much uglier. I tried to ignore it, to work harder, to prove him wrong with results. I stayed late, volunteered for extra tasks, and made sure my deliverables were flawless. I believed that if I just excelled enough, his perception of me would change. I was wrong. The microaggressions continued, like tiny cuts that bled slowly, invisibly. He'd comment on my assertiveness when I spoke up, but praise a male colleague for his leadership. He'd ask if I was comfortable with a technical task, implying I might not be, even after I'd successfully completed similar tasks. The most unsettling part was how he'd make these comments in front of others, always with a plausible deniability. If I challenged him, he could always say, "I was just trying to understand your thought process, Maya," or, "It was a compliment on your unique background." It was gaslighting, subtle and insidious. I started to feel a constant knot of anxiety in my stomach before every team meeting. My confidence, once boundless, began to erode. I questioned my own abilities, my own perceptions. Was I overreacting? Was I truly not good enough? The doubt was his most potent weapon. The atmosphere in the office, once vibrant, began to feel suffocating. I found myself walking on eggshells, constantly analyzing my words, my tone, my very presence. I was so focused on avoiding his subtle jabs that my creativity, my passion for innovation, started to wane. Then came the email, a company-wide announcement for an upcoming innovation showcase, where teams would present their latest breakthroughs to the executive board. Mr. Harrison had signed our team up, and I, as the lead specialist, was expected to present our flagship project. I felt a surge of both excitement and dread. This was my chance to shine, but also to be exposed to his public scrutiny. The weeks leading up to the innovation showcase were a blur of intense work and mounting pressure. I poured every ounce of my energy into perfecting our presentation, knowing this was a critical moment for my career at Innovatech. My project, an AI-driven predictive analytics tool, was truly groundbreaking, and I was immensely proud of it. Mr. Harrison, however, seemed determined to undermine me at every turn. During our practice sessions, he'd interrupt my flow with pointed questions, not to clarify, but to imply confusion or lack of depth. Are you sure you can articulate this complex concept clearly, Maya? Remember, not everyone has your specialized background. He'd insist on trivial changes to my slides, then criticize them for being too busy or not professional enough. It felt like a deliberate attempt to chip away at my confidence, to make me doubt my own judgment, and to ensure I wouldn't shine too brightly. The microaggressions escalated into outright public dismissals. In one team meeting, a colleague praised my work on a specific module. Mr. Harrison quickly interjected, "Yes, Maya handled that small part. But the overall architecture was, of course, a team effort, guided by my vision." He diminished my contribution instantly. Another time, during a casual conversation about weekend plans, I mentioned attending a cultural festival. He scoffed, "Oh, one of those events. I prefer something a bit more refined." The implication was clear. My cultural interests were somehow less sophisticated, less worthy. I started to notice how other colleagues reacted. Some looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Others, particularly those who were also people of color, would offer me subtle nods of solidarity, a shared understanding of the unspoken dynamics at play. It was a lonely and isolating experience. My performance, despite the constant pressure, remained strong. The preliminary data for our AI tool was exceeding expectations, proving its immense potential. I clung to that success, believing that numbers and results would eventually speak louder than Mr. Harrison's subtle slights. But his behavior wasn't just about my work, it permeated every interaction. If I wore my hair in a protective style, he'd make a comment about it being different. If I spoke passionately about an idea, he'd suggest I tone it down or be more objective. It felt like a constant battle against an invisible force trying to erase my authentic self. The night before the innovation showcase, I barely slept. My mind raced with all the potential pitfalls, all the ways Mr. Harrison might try to trip me up. I rehearsed my presentation countless times, determined to be flawless, to leave no room for his criticism. The morning of the showcase arrived, crisp and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I dressed meticulously, choosing an outfit that exuded professionalism and confidence. I reminded myself of my worth, my skills, my years of dedication. As I walked into the grand auditorium, filled with executives, investors, and colleagues, my heart pounded. Mr. Harrison was already there, chatting animatedly with a senior VP. He gave me a brief, dismissive nod as I approached the stage. The presentations began. Each team showcased their innovations, and the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement. When it was our turn, Mr. Harrison introduced me with a lukewarm, almost reluctant tone. "And now, Maya will present our AI predictive analytics tool. She's been assisting on this project." Assisting. I was the lead architect, the primary developer, the one who had spent countless nights bringing it to life. His words were a public demotion, a deliberate attempt to minimize my role before I even began. A wave of anger, cold and sharp, washed over me. Despite the insult, I took a deep breath and began my presentation. My voice, surprisingly steady, filled the room as I articulated the complexities of our tool, its potential impact, and the impressive preliminary results. I answered questions confidently, my passion for the technology shining through. The executives seemed impressed. There were nods, murmurs of approval, and genuine interest in the Q&A session. I felt a flicker of hope, a belief that perhaps, just perhaps, my work had finally transcended his petty prejudices. I was wrong. As I concluded, the room erupted in polite applause. I looked at Mr. Harrison, expecting at least a grudging acknowledgement. Instead, he stepped forward, a tight smile on his face, and delivered the final, crushing blow. "Thank you, Maya," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That was the valiant effort, but I think it's clear this project, and perhaps your role, requires a more seasoned hand." The word seasoned hung in the air, a thinly veiled reference to my youth and, implicitly, my race. The silence that followed Mr. Harrison's words was deafening. It wasn't just a dismissal of my work, it was a public declaration of my inadequacy, wrapped in a racist insinuation. My face burned, and I felt a tremor run through my hands. The room, once filled with the hum of excitement, now felt like a spotlight on my humiliation. He continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, Maya, but Innovatech requires a certain level of gravitas for its lead projects. We've decided to move in a different direction for this role, effective immediately." He paused, letting his words sink in, before adding with a condescending smile, "Perhaps a less demanding position would be a better fit for you if you're interested." The implication was clear. I was being demoted, publicly shamed, and then offered a consolation prize. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of betrayal and rage. I looked around the room. Some executives looked uncomfortable, others avoided my gaze. No one spoke up. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to focus on Mr. Harrison's smug face. He was enjoying this, relishing in my discomfort, in his perceived power over me. He had orchestrated this public spectacle, not just to remove me from the project, but to break my spirit. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrison," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands, "I believe my work speaks for itself. The data, the metrics, they all indicate the success of this project. To suggest otherwise, especially after months of my dedicated effort, is disingenuous." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Maya, we're a results-driven company, and sometimes results aren't enough when the fit isn't right. It's a matter of cultural alignment." That phrase, cultural alignment, was often used in tech to mask deeper biases. It was a dog whistle, and I heard it loud and clear. "So, you're saying my cultural alignment is the issue, not my performance?" I pressed, my voice rising slightly. I knew I was risking more humiliation, but something inside me snapped. I wouldn't let him get away with this without a fight. He sighed dramatically, as if I were being unreasonable. "Maya, this isn't the forum for this discussion. We'll have HR follow up with you regarding your transition. Thank you for your contributions." He then turned his back to me, addressing the room, effectively dismissing me from the stage, from the project, from my job. It was a public execution of my career at Innovatech. The humiliation was searing, a hot brand on my soul. I felt a profound sense of injustice, a burning rage at the unfairness of it all. I had given my all, only to be discarded and mocked because of someone's prejudice. As I walked off the stage, my legs felt like lead. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, some pitying, some uncomfortable. I wanted to disappear, to run away and never look back. But as I reached the exit, a different emotion began to solidify within me. Resolve. The shame, the anger, the pain, they coalesced into a fierce determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or discriminated against because of who they were. This was about holding power accountable. I remember walking out of that auditorium, the Seattle rain starting to fall, mirroring the tears I refused to shed. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly, and sent a single text message to my closest friend, Sarah, a brilliant lawyer I'd known since college. "They just fired me, and I'm going to make them regret it." The humiliation he inflicted, The public mockery, the blatant disregard for my talent and hard work, it all fueled a new purpose. I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. I was going to fight, not just for myself, but for the principle of fairness and equality. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Innovator was a powerful company, and Mr. Harrison was a well-connected executive. But the fire in my belly, ignited by his racist contempt, was stronger than any fear. I was going to expose him, and I was going to make him pay. This was only the beginning. The days immediately following my public firing were a blur of raw emotion. The initial shock gave way to a deep, aching pain, followed by waves of anger. I replayed Mr. Harrison's words, his sneer, the uncomfortable silence of the room, over and over in my mind. It felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. I spent a few days isolating myself, processing the injustice. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. But amidst the despair, a quiet resolve began to form. I remember my parents' lessons. When they try to diminish you, that's when you shine brightest. I knew I couldn't let this stand. Not just for my own dignity, but for anyone else who might fall victim to Mr. Harrison's prejudice. My first step was to acknowledge the emotional toll, but then to channel that energy into action. I made a list of every incident, every microaggression, every dismissive comment. It was a daunting task, as many of his actions were subtle, easily dismissed as misunderstandings. But as I wrote them down, a pattern emerged, a clear narrative of consistent undermining and racial bias. I noted dates, times, specific phrases, and who else was present. I started with the most recent and blatant incident, the innovation showcase. I recalled every word Mr. Harrison said, his tone, his body language. I remember the expressions on the faces of the executives and my colleagues. It was a painful but necessary reconstruction of the event. Then I went back further, recalling the unique perspective comment, the small part dismissal, the cultural festival scoff. Each memory, though small on its own, contributed to a larger, undeniable picture of discrimination. It was like piecing together a complex puzzle. My next step was to reach out to Sarah. She listened patiently, her legal mind already sifting through the details. "Maya," she said, her voice firm, "this sounds like a clear case of hostile work environment and wrongful termination based on discrimination. But we need hard evidence." She advised me to look for anything tangible, emails, chat logs, performance reviews, or even recordings if I had them. She also suggested reaching out to former colleagues, discreetly, to see if they had experienced similar treatment from Mr. Harrison or witnessed his behavior. The idea of contacting former colleagues filled me with anxiety. Would they be willing to speak up? Would they risk their own careers? But I knew that without their testimony, it would be my word against his, and his word, backed by Innovateca's resources, was powerful. I started by reviewing my old emails, looking for any communication from Mr. Harrison that might hint at his bias. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but I was determined. I found a few emails where he'd subtly belittled my contributions, or assigned me tasks beneath my skill level after I'd excelled at something more complex. Then, a small but significant detail clicked in my mind. A few months prior, during a heated debate about project scope, Mr. Harrison had made a particularly egregious comment about my emotionality in front of a junior developer, Mark. I remembered Mark's uncomfortable reaction. Mark, a quiet but observant young man, had always seemed supportive of my work. I decided he would be the first person I'd cautiously approach. It was a risk, but I knew I couldn't build this case alone. I needed allies, people who had seen what I had seen. I drafted a careful, non-accusatory message to Mark, asking if he'd be open to grabbing coffee. My heart pounded as I sent it, knowing this was a crucial step. His response came quickly. "Sure, Maya. I'd like that. How about tomorrow?" A flicker of hope ignited within me. This wasn't just about getting my job back. It was about exposing a systemic issue. It was about ensuring that no one else had to endure the subtle, soul-crushing racism I had faced. The seeds of retribution were sown, and I was ready to water them with every ounce of my resolve. Meeting Mark was a pivotal moment. He listened intently as I recounted my experiences, his expression shifting from concern to quiet anger. "Maya," he finally said, "I saw it. I saw how he treated you. The way he'd dismiss your ideas, the comments he'd make. It was wrong. His validation was a balm to my wounded spirit. He confirmed several incidents I had noted and even added a few I hadn't been aware of, subtle slights he'd observed from a distance. He did it to others too, but it was different with you, Mark admitted, his voice low. More personal, more targeted. Mark, to my immense relief, agreed to provide a statement. He even had a few old chat logs and emails where Mr. Harrison had made questionable remarks about team members' fit or communication styles, which, in context, seemed to target specific individuals. These were invaluable pieces of evidence. With Mark's support and the initial documentation, I officially retained Sarah as my attorney. She laid out the strategy. First, an internal complaint with Innovateca's HR department, backed by our growing evidence. If that failed, we would consider legal action. The process of building the case was meticulous and emotionally draining. Sarah advised me to keep a detailed journal of my feelings, the impact of the discrimination on my mental health, and any new recollections. Every piece of information, no matter how small, could be crucial. I spent hours poring over Innovateca's employee handbook, looking for policies on discrimination, harassment, and workplace conduct. I highlighted every clause Mr. Harrison had violated, every promise of a fair and equitable workplace that had been broken. The challenge was that Mr. Harrison was cunning. He rarely left a direct paper trail of his racist remarks. His tactics were insidious, relying on plausible deniability and the power dynamics of his position. It was like trying to catch smoke. However, Sarah was relentless. She instructed me to reach out to other former employees of Innovatec, particularly those who had worked under Mr. Harrison and had left abruptly. It was a long shot, but she believed there might be a pattern. Through LinkedIn, I cautiously connected with 2 former colleagues, both women of color, who had left Innovatec within the last year. One, a brilliant software engineer named Chloe, agreed to speak with me. Her story mirrored mine with chilling accuracy. Chloe recounted similar experiences of being undermined, having her ideas stolen, and being subjected to Mr. Harrison's subtle but persistent microaggressions. She described feeling constantly othered and eventually driven out by the toxic environment he created. He never said anything overtly racist, Chloe explained, but the way he'd question my intelligence, my cultural understanding, or imply I was too aggressive when I asserted myself, it was exhausting. It wore me down until I had no choice but to leave. Chloe, emboldened by my decision to fight, agreed to provide a detailed affidavit. Her testimony, combined with Mark's, created a powerful narrative. It wasn't just my isolated experience, it was a pattern of behavior, a systemic issue. The breakthrough came when Chloe remembered a specific incident during a company retreat where Mr. Harrison, after a few drinks, had made a truly offensive joke about her heritage in front of several team members. She had dismissed it at the time, but now, with clarity, she realized its significance. She had even recorded a short audio clip of the aftermath on her phone, intending to show a friend later, but had forgotten about it. It wasn't the joke itself, but his dismissive tone when someone challenged him and his subsequent comments about people being too sensitive these days. It was damning. This audio clip, though brief, was the concrete evidence we desperately needed. It proved his pattern of behavior, his dismissive attitude towards concerns about his comments, and his underlying prejudice. It was the smoking gun that could bring down his carefully constructed facade. Armed with Mark's statement, Chloe's affidavit, and the damning audio clip, Sarah filed a formal complaint with Innovateca's HR department. The complaint detailed Mr. Harrison's pattern of microaggressions, public humiliation, and ultimately, my wrongful termination due to racial discrimination. The company's initial response was predictable, a carefully worded email acknowledging receipt of the complaint and assuring us that Innovatec takes all allegations of discrimination seriously. It felt like a stall tactic, a way to buy time and protect their executive. Soon after, Innovatec initiated an internal investigation. I was called in for a series of interviews with HR representatives and an external investigator. I recounted my experiences, presented my documentation, and answered their questions meticulously. It was exhausting, reliving the pain, but I remained steadfast. Mr. Harrison, of course, denied everything. He portrayed himself as a dedicated leader, a champion of diversity, and claimed my allegations were a result of misunderstandings or personal resentment over my performance. He attempted to discredit me, suggesting I was an unstable employee with an axe to grind. He even tried to intimidate Mark and Chloe. Mark received a call from HR, reminding him of his non-disclosure agreement and the importance of company loyalty. Chloe was subtly threatened with legal action for defamation if she continued to spread false rumors. But they held firm. Mark, though nervous, stood by his statement. Chloe, having already left the company, felt more liberated and refused to be silenced. Their courage fueled my own resolve. We were a united front against a powerful adversary. The investigation dragged on for weeks, a period of intense stress and uncertainty. I faced moments of doubt, wondering if I had bitten off more than I could chew. Innovator had deep pockets and a reputation to protect. Would they truly sacrifice a senior executive for a former employee's complaint? Sarah, however, remained my rock. She prepared me for every interview, every potential curveball. "They're trying to wear you down, Maya," she'd say. "Don't let them. Your truth is your power." Her unwavering belief in me was invaluable. During one particularly grueling interview, the external investigator, a stern woman named Ms. Davies, pressed me on the subjectivity of microaggressions. "How can you prove intent, Ms. Grant?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "Intent is often hidden, Ms. Davies," I replied, my voice firm. "But impact is undeniable. When a pattern of behavior consistently undermines, dismisses, and demeans someone based on their identity, the intent becomes clear through the cumulative effect. And we have witnesses." I then played the audio clip Chloe had provided. The investigator's expression remained impassive, but I saw a flicker in her eyes, a subtle shift. The casual racism, the dismissive tone, the lack of empathy, it was all there, undeniable. The atmosphere at Innovatech began to shift. Rumors circulated, whispers about the investigation, about Mr. Harrison. Some colleagues, emboldened by the fact that action was being taken, started to share their own experiences, though mostly anonymously. Mr. Harrison, sensing the tide turning, became more aggressive. He sent me a cease and desist letter through his personal attorney, accusing me of harassment and defamation. It was a desperate move, designed to scare me into silence, but it only strengthened my resolve. Sarah dismissed the letter as baseless. "He's panicking, Maya," she said. "This means we're hitting a nerve." The pressure was immense, but I knew I was on the right path. The turning point came when a senior executive, who had been present at the innovation showcase, discreetly reached out to Sarah. They had seen the public humiliation and were deeply disturbed by Mr. Harrison's behavior. They offered to provide an anonymous statement confirming the hostile environment. This was the crack in Innovatech's wall. An internal witness, a high-ranking one, was willing to speak. Mr. Harrison's position, once unassailable, was now beginning to crumble under the weight of accumulating evidence and internal dissent. The anonymous statement from the senior executive was the catalyst we needed. It wasn't just my word, or the word of former employees. It was a current, high-ranking voice within Innovatech confirming the toxic environment and Mr. Harrison's problematic behavior. This shifted the internal investigation from a mere formality to a serious inquiry. Innovatech's HR department, now facing potential legal exposure and reputational damage, began to take a much harder stance with Mr. Harrison. The external investigator, Ms. Davies, became noticeably more assertive in her questioning of him. The company's priority was no longer just protecting an executive, but protecting its brand. Word of the investigation and the nature of the allegations began to leak to industry insiders. Seattle's tech community is tight-knit, and whispers travel fast. Innovatech, a company that prided itself on its progressive image, was suddenly facing a PR nightmare. Mr. Harrison, once so confident, began to show cracks under pressure. He was seen less frequently in the office, his usual swagger replaced by a tense, agitated demeanor. His attempts to discredit me became more frantic, less subtle, which only served to highlight his desperation. Sarah and I continued to meticulously build our case. We compiled a comprehensive timeline of events, cross-referencing my journal entries with Mark's and Chloe's statements and the audio evidence. Every piece fit together, painting a damning picture of systemic discrimination. We also discovered that Mr. Harrison had a history of similar complaints at previous companies, though none had escalated to this level. This pattern of behavior further strengthened our argument that his actions were not isolated incidents, but a deeply ingrained prejudice. The company's legal team, realizing the gravity of the situation, began to push for a resolution. They knew that a public lawsuit, especially one involving racial discrimination in the tech industry, could severely damage Innovateca's reputation and stock value. I was called into a final meeting with Innovateca's CEO, a formidable woman named Ms. Chun, and the head of HR. Mr. Harrison was not present. Ms. Chun, her face grim, spoke directly. Ms. Grant, we have reviewed the findings of the investigation. We regret to inform you that Mr. Harrison's conduct is not in line with Innovateca's values. It wasn't an apology to me, not yet, but it was an admission of guilt regarding his behavior. They offered a settlement, a significant sum, in exchange for my silence and a non-disparagement agreement. It was tempting, a quick resolution to a painful ordeal. But I remembered the mockery, the public humiliation, the years of subtle abuse. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice, about accountability. I looked at Sarah, who gave me a subtle nod, indicating that we had the leverage. Miss Chun, I said, my voice firm, a settlement is one thing. But what about accountability? What about ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else? And what about the public record of Mr. Harrison's actions? Miss Chun sighed, her gaze unwavering. Mr. Harrison will be leaving Innovatec, effective immediately. We will issue a statement citing differences in leadership philosophy, but his departure will be widely known internally. She then offered to provide me with a strong letter of recommendation, acknowledging my contributions to the company. It wasn't the public firing I had endured, but it was a significant fall from grace for Mr. Harrison. His career at a top tech company was over. The whispers would turn into confirmed facts, and his reputation would be irrevocably tarnished. He would have to explain his sudden departure, and the truth, even if unspoken, would follow him. The terms of a settlement were adjusted to include a commitment from Innovatec to implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all management, with a specific focus on identifying and addressing microaggressions. It was a small victory, but a crucial one for future employees. The tipping point had been reached. Mr. Harrison, the man who had mocked me and fired me in front of everyone, was now facing the consequences of his actions. His power had crumbled, not with a bang, but with the quiet, inevitable force of truth and justice. The news of Mr. Harrison's departure from Innovatec spread like wildfire through the tech community. While the official statement was vague, the internal whispers were loud and clear. He had been forced out, and everyone knew why. His smug smile, once a symbol of his untouchable power, was now a distant memory. For me, the immediate aftermath was a mix of vindication and exhaustion. The intense pressure of the past months had taken its toll. But there was also a profound sense of relief, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The weight of his prejudice, of constantly walking on eggshells, had finally lifted. I didn't return to Innovatec. The settlement provided me with financial stability, but more importantly, it gave me the freedom to choose my next path. I realized that while justice had been served, the experience had changed me. I no longer wanted to just innovate. I wanted to create spaces where everyone could innovate freely, without fear of discrimination. My journey had come full circle. I had arrived in Seattle with big dreams, only to have them nearly crushed by a racist leader. But his attempt to diminish me had instead ignited a fire, forcing me to tap into a strength I didn't know I possessed. The humiliation he inflicted became the fuel for my fight. I spent some time consulting, helping smaller tech startups build inclusive cultures from the ground up. I shared my story, not as a victim, but as a testament to resilience and the importance of speaking up. My experience, painful as it was, transformed into a powerful tool for advocacy. Eventually, I decided to channel my passion and newfound purpose into something bigger. I launched my own tech consulting firm, Equitech Solutions, specializing in AI development and, crucially, in helping companies foster truly equitable and inclusive innovation environments. My first hires were Mark and Chloe. They were not just brilliant engineers, they were allies who had stood by me. Together, we built a company founded on the very principles that Innovatec, under Mr. Harrison, had failed to uphold respect, equity, and genuine innovation driven by diverse perspectives. Equitech solutions quickly gained traction. Our unique approach, combining cutting-edge technology with a strong ethical framework, resonated with clients who were tired of the bro culture often prevalent in tech. We proved that diversity wasn't just a buzzword, it was a pathway to superior innovation. My life now is authentically mine. Every project we undertake, every client we partner with, reflects my values. I no longer have to contort myself to fit someone else's narrow expectations. The confidence that Mr. Harrison tried to strip away has returned, stronger and more rooted than ever. The racist leader fired me and mocked me in front of everyone became a powerful part of my origin story. It was the crucible that forged my resilience, sharpened my purpose, and showed me the true meaning of standing up for what is right. It taught me that sometimes the greatest setbacks are actually the setups for your greatest comebacks. If you're watching this and you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or discriminated against, remember this. Your worth is not defined by someone else's inability to see it. Their prejudice is a reflection of their own limitations, not yours. Find your voice, gather your allies, and turn their mockery into your motivation. Your journey might be painful, but your truth is powerful. Don't let anyone dim your light. Have you ever turned a moment of humiliation into your greatest triumph? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear that their value is undeniable. Thank you for listening to my journey.